Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to completely reframe how you view leadership, resources, and power. We're zeroing in on the hidden dangers of giving just a bit too much away. Because honestly, if you've ever thought that simply being generous is the absolute key to being liked and successful, well, prepare to have your perspective totally shifted.
Let's dive right in by challenging a deeply held assumption, and we're going to use one of the most famously pragmatic texts in history to do it. Niccolo Machiavelli's classic, The Prince. Specifically, we're unpacking Chapter 15. This chapter tackles the incredibly complex dynamics between liberality, generosity, and parsimony. It asks a really dangerous question. Is being generous actually a trap?
To figure that out, we're going to systematically dismantle some common assumptions about leadership and rebuild them step by step. We'll cover the generosity trap, the reality of hidden extraction, the psychology of entitlement, Machiavelli's counter-strategy, and finally, some real-world modern applications.
So, Section 1, the generosity trap. Let's look at a dangerous assumption that gets a lot of well-intentioned leaders in deep water.
Society basically tells us that the nice guy who hands out perks, bonuses, and favors is going to be universally loved, right? We naturally assume that a ruler absolutely should be generous to gain love and a solid reputation. But Machiavelli? He argues this is literally a fast track to ruin. See, the incentive structure seems simple at first glance. Leaders want popularity, so they visibly distribute resources. And people? Well, they naturally love getting free stuff. But this sets up a massive, profound resource depletion problem.
Which brings us to Section 2, the hidden extraction reality. Because to understand exactly why this is a trap, we have to look at the structural reality of where those resources actually come from.
Here's the thing. Resources for generosity aren't magic. They don't just appear out of thin air. They have to be extracted. They're taken from the general population and from the elites through taxation, confiscation, taking on debt, or elite extraction. This means every single gift, every big public display of immense generosity carries a hidden cost. The treasury, unfortunately, is not a bottomless pit.
And this exposes a fairly brutal zero-sum game. Visible generosity today creates hidden coercion tomorrow. By giving away resources right now to buy short-term approval, you're essentially guaranteeing a long-term dependency on extraction. Eventually, you're going to be forced to ruthlessly extract resources from your people or your elites just to keep the whole system afloat. And trust me, those elites will aggressively resist that extraction once your generosity becomes too expensive to maintain.
Moving on to Section 3, the psychology of entitlement. Let's shift gears a bit to the human psychological underlayer and look at how we actually adapt to rewards, because this is exactly where a math problem turns into a human problem.
We're looking at a fascinating concept called hedonic normalization. This is essentially the rapid human adaptation to benefits, which causes people to quickly stop perceiving them as exceptional. Think about it. How do you feel when a shiny new workplace perk is introduced? Like, say, free lunches on Fridays. It's fantastic for the first week. But what happens a month later? That luxury has quickly morphed into your expected baseline. You no longer feel grateful for it at all. You just expect it to be there.
And this brilliantly illustrates the escalation spiral. It starts with a gift, but repeated generosity converts that simple gift into a firm expectation. Then, that expectation rapidly hardens into downright entitlement. And finally, you hit resentment. When the well inevitably runs dry because of that extraction reality we just talked about, the population doesn't politely thank you for the past gifts. Oh no, they resent you for cutting off what they now feel they're inherently owed.
The principle of loss aversion amplification really drives the psychological truth home here. Humans remember the reduction of rewards far, far more intensely than the initial receipt of those rewards. The anger and instability generated from losing a benefit completely overwhelms the fleeting gratitude from gaining it in the first place. You're looking at intense anger from a loss versus just a little bit of gratitude for a gain, meaning your past generosity absolutely will not save you from their current anger when you finally have to tighten the belt.
It's a stark contrast between these two approaches. The generosity trap loop is frantic. You buy popularity, which raises expectations, totally depletes your resources, forces harsh taxation, and ends in massive resentment. Compare that to the calm of the parsimony stability loop. By showing restrained spending, you preserve your treasury. That means you have a drastically reduced need for extraction, which ultimately leads to lower resentment and long-term stability. Honestly, states and organizations collapse far more often from unsustainable generosity than they ever do from controlled frugality.
All right, Section 4, Machiavelli's counter-strategy, the power of parsimony.
So how do we actually solve this universal math problem of infinite human expectations versus finite resources?
Instead of endlessly chasing popularity, Machiavelli neutrally prescribes parsimony, or frugality, as the ultimate power move. His counter-strategies are pretty straightforward. Appear selectively generous, not universally. Preserve your core financial capacity above all else. Avoid distributions that create deep dependencies. And always prioritize your long-term strategic reserves over short-term popularity. Frugality is what actually preserves your strategic flexibility, your independence, and your ultimate capacity to act when things truly hit the fan.
This right here is the mathematical formula for collapse. Think of your resources like a health bar and a video game. If public expectation growth outpaces your resource regeneration capacity, you hit a catastrophic system failure. Boom! You're suddenly forced to over-extract from your system just to maintain an illusion of wealth, and that, historically, is exactly when leaders fall. Let's bring this into the present with Section 5, Modern Strategic Applications, because this framework absolutely proves it isn't just a 16th century politics lesson, it's highly applicable right now.
Let's apply this across a few modern domains. Whether you're managing an AI startup's burn rate, preserving trading capital in financial markets, or securing a network in cybersecurity, the exact same principle holds. In a startup, preserving your financial runway beats signaling confidence through excessive, flashy spending every time. In trading, capital preservation is always superior to overtrading just to look active. And in cybersecurity, building resilient, quiet infrastructure is far more effective than throwing resources at highly visible security theater. Flashing your resources actually destroys your structural support.
Now, to be completely objective, we have to note the critiques of this model. Machiavelli's cold calculations definitely have a few blind spots. For one, his model often underestimates strategic generosity as a genuine long-term investment. It also assumes that economic productivity remains relatively static, but modern systems show us that productive generosity can actually increase total system output. Plus, his model focuses pretty heavily on a survivorship bias of rulers who were bankrupted, sometimes completely ignoring those who successfully used targeted spending to build immense legitimacy.
But the crucial takeaway brings us to this deeper truth. The core issue isn't that generosity is inherently evil. It's not. It's that generosity disconnected from regenerative capacity is inherently destructive. Any reward system, whether we're talking about a whole country, a massive company, or even just a household, if it increases expectations faster than it can generate resources, it becomes entirely self-destructive. I'll leave you to reflect on your own strategies with that final thought. Look closely at your own life, your business, or your leadership style. Are you secretly falling into the generosity trap? Are you buying short-term approval at the absolute cost of your long-term survival? I hope this explainer has given you a powerful new lens to view resource management and sparked your curiosity to look a little deeper into the hidden dynamics of power and expectation.